Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here today in Ottawa on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. We'll have brief comments and open the floor to some questions. So this morning, we're here to release Housing Canada, a sovereign plan to protect Canadians and build a resilient housing system. We've come together as a coalition of organizations across the housing spectrum as Canada faces a raging housing crisis and a trade war with the United States. Canada is in the grips of a housing crisis. CMHC estimates that to restore affordability to our housing market, we need to build over 5.8 million units of new housing by 2030. A product of this crisis is surging homelessness. In a September poll that we commissioned with Abacus Data, we found that 12% of Canadians reported having experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. That's 4.8 million people, equivalent to the entire population of Alberta. More than half of Canadians at the time, 57%, said they were already worried about losing their home if their financial situation were to change. We estimate that over 300,000 people, Canadians, will experience homelessness this year alone. The housing crisis and homelessness will be made much worse by a trade war and aggressive American economic policy. Without direct and targeted action to protect Canadians and our housing system, housing insecurity will rise as a direct result of the economic hardship Canada will face. This will hit low and middle-income Canadians the hardest, people who are already struggling to afford a place to live, and it will push more and more people into homelessness. We've come together as a coalition to put forward a plan to protect Canadians and build a resilient housing system. Our 10-step plan proposes affordable and achievable policy actions that should be part of any Team Canada response to an increasingly hostile and erratic American administration. At the heart of our plan is a simple message: a safe, secure, and prosperous Canada begins at home. These 10 ideas have been identified to address the challenges ahead of us, from immediate measures to protect Canadians to medium and long-term measures to that will build resilience in Canada's housing system and address the housing crisis. These ideas recognize and address the challenges we'll face, from supply chain disruptions, labor issues, and increasingly difficult financing, and more. We can't possibly predict how President Trump will act. So as a country, we need to take the initiative to secure our future and protect our neighbors together. Recognizing the tough times on the immediate horizon, our plan begins with strategies aimed at building a housing safety net to ensure Canadian families keep a roof over their heads. This includes introducing new tools like a homelessness prevention and housing benefit to provide immediate relief to households at risk of homelessness. It includes enhancing community capacity to respond to unsheltered homelessness and creating a strong framework of policies aimed at protecting and bolstering Canada's existing affordable rental stock. With an increasingly erratic and aggressive American administration, the Canadian economy needs a strong foundation, and Canadian families need the fundamental security of a home. We have no idea what the American administration will do next, so we have to be proactive together to protect ourselves and build a strong and resilient housing system. A safe, secure, and prosperous Canada begins at home. I'll first pass to my colleague Alana to share some remarks in French.
Merci Tim et bonjour tout le monde. Comme Tim a expliqué, nous se sommes réunis aujourd'hui avec une vision commune: inverser la crise de logement au Canada, protéger les Canadiens et construire un système de logement solide. Le Canada est en pleine guerre commerciale, mais ça fait longtemps qu'on est aussi dans une crise de logement. Nous savons que l'effet de l'incertitude et les mesures économiques imposées par les États-Unis, ainsi que les actions en réponse par le gouvernement du Canada, se seront sentis dans l'ensemble de l'économie canadienne et dans le secteur de logement. sans des actions directées et ciblées pour protéger les Canadiens et notre système de logement, l'insécurité de logement augmentera en conséquence directe des difficultés économiques auxquelles le Canada est confronté. En préparation à ce qui nous attend, nous avons le plaisir aujourd'hui de présenter un toit au Canada, un plan souverain pour protéger les Canadiens et bâtir un système de logement résilient. Notre plan présente 10 actions politiques clés pour relever les défis qui nous attendent. Ça inclut des mesures immédiates pour protéger les Canadiens, comme a indiqué Tim, et des mesures à moyen et à long terme qui renforceront la résilience du système de logement. Nous ne puissions pas être sûrs de l'avenir des tarifs, mais nous savons que les Canadiens ressentent déjà les pressions et ils ont besoin que leur gouvernement agisse vite et audacieusement pour protéger les Canadiens et leur logement. Je vous remercie et si vous avez des questions tout à l'heure posées en français, je serai heureux d'y répondre. Et maintenant, je le remets à Shaun. À vous.
I'm joining you as President-elect of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, CHRA. And we are here today with a shared concern for Canadians and our housing system. Over the past several years, CHRA, along with our members in the community housing sector, have been calling for Canada to bolster community housing, not only to deliver the affordable housing Canadians desperately need, but also to drive economic growth. In this moment of economic uncertainty, what we do know for certain is that housing is an economic driver. For example, a study CHRA published with Deloitte in 2023 found that by doubling the share of community housing in Canada, we could create an economic benefit of between $67 billion and $136 billion. Housing is a key part of Canadian infrastructure. Community housing must be grown and preserved for the vital public asset that it is. Partnerships and collaborations like we have here today can drive more efficient, resilient housing systems so that all Canadians are supported with a strong foundation and a place to call home. At this time, to keep investing in home building, to keep investing in making housing more affordable for Canadians. One of the recommendations we have today is calling for a bold investment in community housing, an investment to deliver stable, affordable homes and good-paying jobs at the same time. The same urgency applies to the need to rapidly expand Indigenous, urban, rural, and northern housing. In 2021, over 171,000 Indigenous households were living in unaffordable or inadequate housing. There are some unique and targeted measures the government can take right now that includes investing in community housing in the following ways. Funding capital repairs to preserve our existing housing stock, providing long-term and sustainable funding to the community housing sector, expanding federal investments for Indigenous, urban, rural, and northern housing, and making strategic investments to rapidly expand the supply of supportive housing. The recommendations outlined today are ways to make strategic housing investments to create a strong, stable, and more equitable foundation during unstable times. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Pedro.
Thank you very much. My name is Pedro Barata. I'm President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Canada. The current state of housing in Canada is falling short of what Canadians need. And with further challenges likely on the horizon, we have to recognize just how vulnerable our housing system is to these external shocks. So the plan that we've laid out today aims to address these risks. And as we lay out in our report, the systems that make up the foundation of our housing system are too fragile right now. In a context of increasing external pressures, our supply chains, our workforce, our regulatory landscape, they all risk becoming hindrances to home building rather than much needed drivers. We have to anticipate that the cost of materials like steel and lumber are very likely going to rise, and that this will very quickly lead to the real risk of project delays, increased project costs, as well as cancellations. And so we have an opportunity, and there is a necessity to act now to build a more resilient housing system. So this means investing in domestic manufacturing of key housing materials so that we aren't reliant on imports that can be disrupted by tariffs. It means reducing interprovincial trading barriers. It means doubling down on a housing skills agenda for Canada, where we prioritize training and reskilling workers into housing trades. There needs to be more attention to supporting Canadian workers in the face of the threat of job losses coming from a trade war. We should scale up innovative solutions like modular and factory-built housing. These can help deliver more homes at lower costs despite rising material prices. And finally, we need to act now to ensure that our tax system, including the GST, are hobbling much-needed housing supply. And removing the GST from affordable new builds is absolutely essential in that respect. Canada's housing system needs leadership and action to ensure resilience in uncertain times. We have an opportunity now to mitigate the risks of a trade war on Canada's housing system, while at the same time future-proofing our sector from ongoing economic cycles and shocks. I'd like now to invite Janice Myers to the podium.
Good morning. My name is Janice Myers. I'm CEO of the Canadian Real Estate Association. I'm very proud to stand here today along with our coalition partners. Canada entered 2025 amid a housing crisis, and the pressures around us right now are amplifying what Canadians are already feeling. I stand here today alongside my partners in the housing sector because now more than ever, we need to take a Team Canada approach to responding to tariffs and embedding housing in Canada's response. Rents are rising, mortgages are becoming more expensive, home ownership is further out of reach, and now tariffs are making it harder to build homes that we need. We're not here today as individual organizations, but as a united coalition, housing providers, real estate professionals, home builders, and those who work to end homelessness. We all have a shared stake in finding solutions to fix the housing crisis for everyone. Our plan, Housing Canada, a sovereign plan to protect Canadians and build a resilient housing system, lays out the solution Canada needs now. The Government of Canada must act to ensure that housing is part of its economic response. And that means, number one, protecting Canadians from the immediate threats ahead of us, acting to provide stability for those hardest hit, and preventing a wave of new homelessness. Number two, driving economic growth by investing in housing, particularly community housing. And three, creating the conditions through resilient supply chains, a trained and agile workforce, and innovation to sustain and withstand the economic shocks ahead of us and build a resilient housing system for generations to come. In terms of economic impact, according to Altus Group Economic Consulting, from 2020 to 2022, the average housing transaction in Canada generated an estimated $76,000 in spin-off spending in the economy for things like renovations, furniture, as well as moving costs and legal and financial services. That added an additional $43 billion in spending to the economy and resulted in the creation of an estimated 233,000 jobs. Canadians need the government to act to ensure that housing is part of its economic response to this trade war. Canada is at a crossroads, and we have a choice. We can let it deepen our housing crisis, or we can use this moment to build a stronger, more resilient housing system. A safe, secure, and prosperous Canada starts at home. Once again, thank you for being here, and we would be pleased to take your questions.
We don't have any question at the moment. Nous n'avons pas de questions pour l'instant. Is there something you would like to add to your statement?
Don't have anything.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse.
Thank you. Thank you.
Merci.